Welcome back, Epic Families. I am so excited to be with you this week, and I have a special guest. Bruce is with us. It's going to be a little bit different style tonight, but I think there's going to be a lot of great words of wisdom and encouragement to come out of it. But first, this Saturday, so February 6th at 12:15, WL Epic will be meeting at the Hub, and then they'll be leaving to go to Pokagon State Park. Is it a state park?
Yeah,
it's a state park.
Yeah.
And they'll be doing the toboggan run. So 12:15, meet at the Hub. You don't need to bring any money for tickets, but maybe some money for hot chocolate. Dress warm, dress really warm, because it's probably going to be cold. So 12:15, and then you'll be home in the middle of the afternoon sometime. Also, upcoming in our Epic Families, Sam Sherrick is going to be coming around to each family to do some small like living room worship for the next couple weeks. And on our next couple Epic Family reunions, there'll be an opportunity, if you want to be a part of the worship team for the Epic Family reunions, then you have the opportunity to. If you can play an instrument or if you want to help sing, contact me or text Nick and we'll get you involved. And we're really excited and thankful for Sam and his time and just giving his giftings to us for just a little while. So this week, in the next couple weeks, Bruce is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about just dealing with hard things. What does that mean? What does that look like? How can it apply to even someone that's lived a long life and is very wise, but it can apply to us as young people and apply to you as high schoolers and middle schoolers. So let's get right into it. Well, Bruce, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
My first question for you is, can you tell us a bit about your spiritual walk, about how you kind of came to know the Lord, and just a little background for those students that may not know you?
Yeah. I'm glad to be with you guys for a few weeks. Grew up in a home, I don't remember a time where I didn't believe in God. That was largely due to my grandparents. It was church every Sunday. Some of you have grandparents like that. But it was an hour on Sunday. It was never talked about at home. There was nothing in terms of spiritual input from my parents. We were taught to be moral, but there wasn't anything beyond that in terms of any spiritual input or investment. So the big defining feature growing up for me was trouble at home. So from the time I was real little, I remember laying in bed listening to my parents fighting downstairs, mostly my dad. And so I grew up with the most important thing was to keep the peace and not rock the boat. Mm-hmm. Made me very compliant, but also pretty fearful, right. And didn't know what to do with it. My dad lost his job when I was in 8th grade. So I was your normal, really quiet, unsure of himself, didn't know where I fit introvert. People look at me now and say, what? But back then that was the way I handled things, and the pressure at home was just kind of stay in my shell. I wanted a couple of friends. Then my dad loses his job and we move. Really lonely time, early 1970s. Didn't know anybody. Tried out for a couple of sports teams, quit, didn't make it. I thought that would help me fit in. There was no connection to church because my parents had stopped going now because of the stress in their marriage. Mm-hmm. They separated when I was 15, divorced when I was 16. And about that time, a guy moved into town and we became best friends. He had moved from Chicago and his family was the refuge for me. I'd go hang out at their house because it was calm, it was peaceful, they seemed to like each other. And then I figured out, oh, they're Christians. I didn't even know what that meant at that point. But my best friend, this buddy, was the guy that he didn't know whether I was a Christian or not. He said, well, you were moral. I didn't know what you were like. And so he never really shared the gospel, but he talked about his faith. He actually came back from Momentum one summer and was talking about sitting around reading his Bible and all that the Lord was teaching him. And I remember it was a Saturday night, and that night I I didn't know how to pray or anything else. I just said, God, whatever he's got, I want. And that was it for me. Went to Sunday school the next day with him and started into youth group and Wednesday night and Sunday night and my version of Epic back then. And it just was a spot where all of a sudden I had family and friends, and I went overnight from introvert to extrovert and loving being around the rest of the youth group.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bruce. So, WO Epic Families, if you remember, for the last couple weeks we talked about prioritizing time. But if you remember to last year, it feels like forever ago, but if you remember to last year, we talked about, we went through the book of Habakkuk, and we talked about highs and lows and what it's like to be in the valley and the mountaintop. If you remember, I drew that big swirly thing on the whiteboard. Feels like forever ago, but just remember back with me. And Bruce has experienced a lot of life, but he's also experienced a lot of mountaintop and valley moments. And since he's experienced more, he's had the opportunity to trudge through those moments, to experience what it's like. And if you remember, I called those moments spiritual highs. When we went from the valley and we felt like we were trending toward the top, those moments were filled with joy in seeing what the Lord would do in our lives. And we felt like we were exactly where we needed to be. We felt like everything was going right. Remember, it felt like all of the Christian music that we were listening to felt perfect. It was just awesome to feel like we were on that high, in that upward trending moment. But like we talked about, life does include valleys and it does include mountaintops. And we see in 1 Peter 4:11, it tells us if anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. So Bruce, a question that I have for you is, was there ever a time in your life where it felt like a valley was followed by a valley? So instead of trending upward out of that valley, it felt like it was just one after another. And I'm sure that maybe some of you have felt that in this time of quarantine, or it felt like things just kept on happening one after another and didn't seem to be trending upwards.
A couple of times for me that I think of that felt like that was just, why can't I get out of the bottom dip of that and start picking back up? After we were married, I still had a relationship with my dad that came post-divorce, but then his health, especially his mental health, started to be a real challenge. And there was a period of about a year to two, it was almost 2 years. My dad would call, he never picked up the pieces after the divorce, never went on with his life. He didn't know the Lord when he died at 53, which is pretty young.
Yeah.
And you would have seen him and thought he was pushing 80. Looked rough, didn't take care of himself, really, really hard end of life. Well, in those last years, when he didn't pick up the pieces, he had to have somebody to blame for what went on at home. I'm the oldest of 5 sons. So guess who got it? I was the target. And so my dad, I knew it was his mental health, but he would call and he'd talk for an hour straight. I never said anything. I remember a couple of times putting the phone down. Not cell phone, this is pre-cell phone. I put the phone down and kept doing what I was doing, picked it up 20 minutes later, and he's still going. And it was recounting everything from the years of their marriage and what went wrong and why it wasn't his fault and why I was the problem. We were Operation Barnabas leaders one summer, and he'd write these long 15-page handwritten, same kind of thing, just laying it on me. Drove my wife nuts. I was a little more, I don't know, I tried to let it roll off me because I knew it was driven by his mental health also. But it was really hard to handle, really hard for her to handle. He addressed a letter to me while we were on Barnabas. Bruce Barlow, Operation Barabbas. And he did it on purpose. It wasn't Operation Barnabas. Barabbas was the murderer, the traitor who was released instead of Jesus
Yeah.
in Passion Week.
Mm-hmm.
And he was digging in. That was a time that was like, just felt relentless from him. Another time that felt that way, when I first moved back here, I was working at Grace College. Things at Grace are really positive now. Back then they went through some horrible budget cut times, and every day at work I was in charge of student discipline, and I didn't know what the future was going to be at Grace. So every day I'd come home and Christy would say, "How was it today?" And there was always something new that I was like, it just felt like another piece being loaded on each time, and the weight of it was really, really heavy. And I've walked through that kind of time with other people when a marriage is falling apart, and it's valley after valley. It can be really challenging to see Jesus through the fog of that and the pain of it.
And so to kind of bring us through that, we can see in Hebrews 3:1 it says, "Fix your thoughts on Jesus." It continues later in Hebrews 12, "Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." So God became man, Jesus became human in order to provide forgiveness for the sins of humanity. And because of these wonderful truths, because he died for our sins, he is uniquely equipped to help us. Hebrews encourages us as the readers to dwell on the person of Christ, to set our whole mind upon him. Jesus gives us strength to stand firm in those moments, in those valleys. But it's not always easy. And in practical terms, this means putting Jesus first in every area of our life. It means focusing our thoughts, focusing our eyes on him. But we have to, like we talked about in the last series, we have to prioritize that. We have to focus on what that means. And so, Bruce, why is it so hard to stay fixed on Jesus at all times, but especially in times of those valleys?
And you gave us both Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 12. The fixing, I'll often tell myself that. Nope, let's run with perseverance and fix our eyes on Jesus, the Hebrews 12 part. Why it's so hard? We're rebels. And we can't see him.
Right.
So there's something in us that we know God does his best work in us when we're in pain. And when we can't figure it out ourselves. We know that's the time when we grow the most. But there's just something about our broken nature, our sinful nature, that we expect and want comfort. So we're all, get me out of the hard thing as fast as possible.
Right.
And the notion that God's love and his sovereignty and his plan for us, that his best for us might be walking through that valley because he's going to produce things in us. The book of Job.
Right.
I'll say something in a minute about the Thessalonians. They trusted Jesus and life got harder. Man, wait a minute. Isn't God supposed to make things more? His job's to make my life more comfortable, right? Well, if we're fine, I guess you can say, well, God's job is to just work with us. We aren't fine. We're broken. We're rebels. We go, I want life my way. I want what I want. God, how come you aren't coming through? The reason we see people walk away from their faith is God hasn't been the genie in the bottle that's solved everything for them. Well, no. He says, I'll walk with you through the valley of the shadow of death. He leads us through that. He carries us through it. We want to be rescued out of it. Unfortunately, our heart's resort, or what we shift to, is whatever we can feel, grab onto, see. So if the pain in the valley and the hard time is making it hard to see God and fix our eyes, we go after an idol. Something else will fill up and make me feel better in the hard time. They're all lies. They don't make us feel any better. But we think they're going to.
Right.
And the more we give our attention off to one of those idols or something that we think will fix things, the less our focus is on Jesus. So it's, I'm going to ditch the fake, the false, the substitute, and I'm going to fix my eyes there instead, knowing the problem is my desire to flee, not that God isn't there with me in it.
And you touched a bit on reminding yourself of those verses in Hebrew, but what's another practical way that you would practice throughout your life when you were in those moments to remind yourself to fix your eyes, or something that you actively did to help you focus in those moments?
Well, it's one I still do, and I'm growing. I want to get better at it, but I just ask myself, what is God up to? And when I'm frustrated, I had some times this weekend where I was like, I don't like what's going on. I'm ticked. God, who do you think you are? Why don't you get me out of this?
Best questions.
No. God's in charge. He's up to something in me, in the situation that had me upset. He's up to something. And if I can ask myself that, it'll get my focus back off the frustration and back onto, he's at work.
Right.
What's it doing in me? What's it doing in the people that are also a part of
Right.
it? So ask yourself, what's God up to in this?
And that's awesome. And I'm going to leave it with this one more question. So like you said, you kind of always knew about morality, or you kind of always, had this little moral compass, if you would. But you didn't have a dad that sat at the end of your bed and read Bible stories or encouraged you throughout your life to grow spiritually. Thankfully, I was blessed to, and I know a lot of our students have great parents that have blessed them with this as well.
Thank the Lord.
But what is a response that you can give, an encouragement that you can give to people that haven't had to experience those hardships yet, that haven't been deep in those valleys, or that haven't had like that come to Jesus moments? How can you encourage our students and even our leaders that haven't quite had those moments to say, no, it's not, you don't have to experience extreme hardships to come and grow in your faith with Jesus, and it's not always a bad thing if you don't have this crazy up and down story.
Yeah. We were talking about it before. There's a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And it's from a pastor. He's really, really old now, but a guy that I really respect, and has written a bunch of things. I like that picture. Following Jesus, a long obedience in the same direction. Yes, there's a moment of conversion, and I trust Jesus, and I turn away from my sins, but I think there's a downside to thinking about, the point where my moment of decision. Is that important? Yeah. But more important is the daily decisions. There's another pastor, this guy's in his 80s now, he says, I get up every day and make a decision to be a Christian. And this guy, you'd think, huh? Amazingly wise guy. But he said, I have to every day make the decision, am I going to go my own way or go God's way? And so when there isn't a dramatic shift, thank the Lord. He hasn't had to pull you out of a bunch of junk that you've got to figure out how to reprogram and deprogram the old stuff, the old me. When I come to Christ, the old is gone, the new has come. He makes us a new creation. If you don't have a lot of old BC, before Christ, pre-Jesus stuff that you have to put behind you, praise God for it. And now you get to look at the new creation, the new life, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time, long obedience in the same direction. I thought of the Thessalonians. First generation Christians, all of them. Gospel's brand new. It's one of the first letters written by Paul. One of the earliest. He says, your reputation's gone all over the region because they all report how you turn from idols to serve the living and true God. What was it? The turning. Everybody knew They watched them and said, oh, those people are now serving one God, the God. And so I don't know that they knew anything about their prior, or what was involved in the idols they worshiped, but just that point of turning. They belong to God now. And that's what we want to be known for.
Absolutely. Amen. We just went through a lot of stuff. And I'm thankful for Bruce to be willing to pour back into those coming after him. And I hope that you were able to glean well and hear some things tonight that might stick with you. Bruce will be joining us again next week, and we can continue to dive more into his story, dive into what it means to deal with hard things. Epic Families, I'm so blessed to be able to be in front of you again, and I hope you have some great conversations. Leaders, there's some small group questions in the staff email that was sent out. But until next week, I hope you guys have a great week in the Lord, and I love you all. We will see you next week. See you later, Epic Families.